All right, welcome back, everybody, comrades, Tobaj, if you will. We're here to talk about some more X-Men. So we pick up with X-Men, Uncanny X-Men number 176, and this one focuses a lot on like the honeymoon adventures of Scott and Madeline. So they're flying. He's distracting her by giving her sweet kisses on the mouth, and she's talking about how he needs to stop distracting her because there's like a hurricane behind them and they're trying to get past it. But then they get hit by like a squall, which is like a little storm that goes ahead of the main storm or something, and they get zapped, and then we go, and then they're like, oh no, they're falling to their death. And then meanwhile, over in Japan, Wolverine shows up with the ceremonial sword of the Ishida clan to Miko's or Mariko's like bedchamber, and they have a conversation. He's like, what the fuck's this all about? And then she's like, I want you to take it. It's the honor blade, blah blah blah. I love you, all this stuff. And he's like, well, you let me, like, let's be together then. And she's like, I can't be together with you because while I was under the control of like Mastermind, he made me do all this crazy stuff and ally with like the underground of the Japanese like Yakuza, and so I have to like remedy that situation by myself. You know, repair Clan Yoshida's name, and then we can be together. And he's like, I want to help. And she's like, no, I must do this alone. Just like you took care of me alone when dealing with her father and regaining honor, I have to do this alone. And then he's like, okay. So he takes the sword and is like, well, let me know. And she's like, of course. And then she cries because it's, you know, she's sad that she wants to be with Wolverine, but she can't right now because she has to do all this like crazy bullshit. Back over to Cyclops and Madeline, they're trying to fix the plane. All the electronics are shot and whatnot, and then Scott almost gets eaten by like a great white shark, but he blasts it real good, and they hug it out. And then we see there's some sort of like giant octopus underneath that like eats up that delicious great white shark. Over in Washington, we got Henry Gyrak, who's kind of an asshole, but he's not doing any asshole stuff in this issue. He's meandering about. He heads into like this conference room. We see that that Magneto has done something with like a volcano and destroyed like an island and stuff. And I don't remember exactly when that happened, and I don't think this quotes when it happens. I think it happens in an issue we're going to read in the 2 weeks from now. But we'll see when we get there. Anyway, so they're talking about that. They're talking about his demands, end of nuclear, blah, 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 all this stuff. And then our friend Valerie Cooper, who is Mystique in disguise. I don't know if we know that yet. Anyway, but that's who she is. She talks about mutants and how the Russians are using mutants and everyone's using mutants and the Americans need to start using mutants and they need to start getting on board. And Gyrak's not too pleased about the whole situation, but I think we kind of leave it there for a little bit. We then head back over to the Pacific. Scott and Madeline are in like a lot of trouble. Like the hurricane's like really hitting them hard, and now the engines are like waterlocked. And then we see like the tentacle coming up to grab the ship. Over in New York City, we hit up the Morlocks. Caliban comes back to his home, and there's a Callisto and Mask and her other goon, big guy. Can't remember his name. Anyway, they're like harassing him and whatnot and talking about how he needs to come back and be with the Morlocks and stuff. And they see a picture of Kitty Pryde that he loves. And then Callisto has like a whole conversation with him about his love for Kitty Pryde and how she promised to be with him if he helped. And then she like reneged on her promise and how they got to do something to fix that problem. Back over into the Pacific, they're like, okay, they finally got like the plane. It looks like it's going, but then Madeline gets grabbed by the octopus monster while she's trying to pull at the anchor. She gets dragged underwater. Cyclops goes underneath. We get like a monster battle with like Cyclops blasting it with his eyes. He loses his glasses at some point. He gets Madeline away. He gets like nabbed up again, and then he like super blasts it and is able to swim to the shore. And get his visor back on the plane before they take off. And then they're able to, oh no, it's waterlogged again. And so they kiss for good luck, and then they take the plane, and it works. And they're able to get airborne and over the storm. And they're like, hooray, we did it. And then like they hug it out, and they're like, all right, we got no radio, no electrical equipment, but like we're going to some deserted island. I think we'll be okay. And then I don't really think it gets brought up again because it's like, they'll be fine. And they even send like a letter to Professor X at a later issue saying like, we're doing great, just in case you were worried. So that takes us to 177. All right, in this next issue, we start off with Mystique in Carnival getting attacked by Wolverine. She kills him somehow. Then she gets attacked by Kitty Pryde, kills him by pretending to be Wolverine. Colossus comes, blasts some stuff. She ends up killing him or blasting him with some sort of like thing. And then Cyclops comes to get him. And then she takes him into like a house of mirrors where she tricks him into destroying Colossus and then garrotes him. She then changes into like some other outfit and then gets attacked by Storm in her non-punk rock form. And so she's able to beat Storm by blowing up something. And then she goes to like the Big Top Circus and gets attacked by Rogue, who tries to get her real good, but then she gets blasted, and then Mystique's super sad about killing Rogue and all this stuff, and then Nightcrawler grabs her and bamps her around, and right as she's about to like stab him, she hesitates, which allows him to beat her, and she gets knocked out. She then wakes up. She's with her girlfriend / wife. What's her name? Destiny, I think. She's like patting her head and making sure she's okay. And then Arcade rolls in the room with his lady friend, Miss Locke. And he's like, that was awesome. That was so much fun. I loved every second of it. You did a great job. And then Mystique's like, I want you to train all the Brotherhood evil mutants on the X-Men robots as well. And then he's like, okie dokie, sounds good. As long as we can keep doing what I did before, which is like, one of the robots will kill instead of just stun. And she's like, sounds good. And then before he leaves, she's like, which one was it? And he's like, Rogue, of course. Teehee. And then Destiny like questions her whole like vendetta against the X-Men and whatnot, and Mystique is like super pissed off. She's like, Xavier like tricked my daughter into going with him, and I gotta get revenge, and yada 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 yada. Meanwhile, over at Stevie Hunter's like dance studio, Kitty looks like she's like pretty upset. Her and Stevie get into a discussion about how Storm's changed, and it's not just like an appearance, it's like her whole personality and all this stuff. And then after she leaves, Stevie's like, hey girlfriend, it's not that big of a deal, like she's not really meaning that stuff. And then Storm's like, no, I think she might be right. Up on the Starjammer's ship, Lilandra and Xavier are saying goodbye to each other and talking about like her suicide mission and whatnot. And then we see Corsair saying goodbye to his sons, to Alex and Scott, and then they all teleport out of there. And then Corsair and Lilandra talk about the civil war that's coming up and what they're going to do, and if they're going to be successful or whatnot. And they don't know, so they go off on their own adventures. Meanwhile, in New York City, I think they're going to the Lincoln Center for a ballet. Are Kurt and Amanda and Colossus and Kitty Pryde. And so Kurt and Amanda get out, and they're chit-chatting about Kurt's family, about how he was raised by Amanda's mom, and how he asked Mystique about if they were related because they look alike, and she said, ask your mother, who is Savardos, Magarly Savardos, the witch, the mother of Amanda. And then Amanda's like, well, she'll be in like Amsterdam or something pretty soon, so we can give her a ring there and ask her what she knows. Meanwhile, Colossus and Kitty find a car to park, and they're walking along when a building goes like boom, and so Colossus is like, go call for some help, and I'm gonna run up there. So he runs up and he runs into the Blob. Oh no, it was a trap. So then he gets jumped by the Blob and by Pyro and just kind of like beat up, and then he crash lands into the ground, and then Avalanche, so he's like burning hot from Pyro's attack. And then Avalanche gets a bunch of trucks to dump like liquid nitrogen on him or something, which frees him. And then Kitty Pryde sees that he's been like turned into like stone or something because of the chemical reaction between the hot and cold or whatnot. And that takes us to issue number 178, where we pick up with Kitty being like, no, and she's crying. And then she like calls out to Professor X in her mind, and this is where Professor X sees like the engagement photo, or the Cyclops and Madeline like sent him a photo of them like in bed, like post coitus, I guess. I think the fuck, that's weird. Anyway, so then he gets the message from Kitty Pryde, and he's about to tell the rest of the X-Men, or he tells Storm and Wolverine to head over to help, and Wolverine and Storm are in the danger room practicing some stuff, and Rogue's just like listening to music, reading with Professor X. And he's like, let's not send Rogue right now. We gotta figure this out. And then he gets like attacked by something in his head. Like he mentioned some psi scan, and it's like it hurts him a lot. Back over to New York, Kitty is thinking about. She remembers hearing something about Reed Richards having some sort of device that can like cure any sort of anomaly or something. So she thinks if she can get it, she can help Colossus. So she calls the Baxter Building. They're not around. So she decides she's going to go over and steal it. So she runs, hops in a cab, heads over there. Meanwhile, the Morlocks are up to no good. They're out in like an alleyway, and they find this chick who came to New York, and like her family doesn't know where she's at, and she has no relatives here, and she's like dead from like a drug overdose. So then they get masked to change her face, and they talk about how it's going to help with their plan. Kurt and Amanda are like tongue bathing each other. Right in front of the Lincoln Center instead of going into the performance, when Amanda's like, that's weird, where are these guys at? And then they see this giant like firebird in the sky, so Pyro. So then he teleports Amanda and him like up, and then they get attacked by Avalanche, and he's teleporting around, and then she uses magic to help, and then the Blob shows up and grabs Amanda and threatens to kill her. And so Nightcrawler like gives himself up, but then right as the Blob is about to kill them both, Storm and Wolverine show up, and then Destiny's like, ruh-roh. And so they start fighting over at the Baxter building. Kitty Pryde like wanders in, gets past their like robot secretary or whatnot, who activates some sort of like alarm, which doesn't matter. Anyway, back over with the Brotherhood of Mutants and X-Men. Kurt, Logan, and Aurora are just beating the shit out of him for the most part. Aurora's like really blasting him up with like some rain, so Pyro's completely out of the thing. Kurt's just beating the shit out of Avalanche, and then Wolverine's taking care of the Blob, who's not invincible. He just can't be like knocked down or whatever, and he can like bounce people off his fat belly. Kitty finds back over to Baxter building. Kitty finds the item that she was looking for, and she goes to like use her like shadow walk off the building when she's like no, and then she like supposedly falls or whatever. The Brotherhood finally get defeated by the X-Men, and they're holding them. They're going to turn them into the police or whatever, and the Blob's laughing because it doesn't matter, that they were just a distraction for what was really going on, and even if they send them to jail, they'll get out, so they can go fuck themselves. We head back over to the mansion, and Professor X is still recovering from like whatever fucking thing was attacking his brain when Rogue walks up with a gun and tries to shoot him, but at the last second he realizes what's going on, even though she has like a side dampener on it, and he's able to like dodge it the way so he doesn't die. So he's just injured. And then at that point, real Rogue runs in, 'cause of course it was Mystique. And then they get into a huge argument, and Rogue's like, "The fuck are you doing?" And she's like, "I'm here to rescue you." And it's like, "I don't need rescuing. I came here on my own volition." It's like, "No, you were tricked." And she's like, "I wasn't tricked. There's nothing you can do to help me." And then she goes in this whole rant about how like when she was a little girl, Mystique would like hold her while she cried at night, and that Mystique can't touch her now, and how she's sick and tired of having of seeing like she attacked Dazzler because she was so mad at Dazzler because Dazzler could have the life she wants, you know, like having boyfriends and touching people and doing all that stuff, and Rogue can't. And it's just like, you know, Professor X might be able to help, and then like, you know, so they go back and forth. Finally, Mystique like gets that like, no, like this is Destiny was right. I was like Mama was right. I took it this a step too far. So then she calls out. She's some sort of like admitter, and it's like her with a gun over Professor X, and she's like, "Let the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants go, or I'll kill Professor X," and then otherwise I'll leave. And so then Wolverine and Aurora and Kurt are like, "All right, that's fine." So the Brotherhood of Mutants like wander off, while the rest of them are just kind of like sass mouthing them and whatnot. And then before they leave, Destiny's like, "You need to get over here right away because there's peril." And then we see a bunch of people standing around the Baxter building, and there's a dead girl there, and it looks like Kitty Pryde. Dun dun dun. Which takes us to the last issue of this arc. 179, which starts off with Kitty being dressed for like a wedding by the Morlocks, and then she's being led ahead, and she looks like she's totally drugged up. Back over at the Bellevue Hospital, the X-Men have been summoned to do an identification of Kitty Pryde, and so they open it up. It looks just like Kitty Pryde. It's Storm, Rogue, and Wolverine are over there, and then Storm's like kind of freaking out, and there's like a storm going on overhead, and then Wolverine's like, "Hey Doc, you should leave right now." And the Doc's like, "Well, that's not procedure." He's like, "Get the fuck out." And so he's like, "Okay, I'll give you 5 minutes." So he leaves, and Wolverine's like, Wolverine literally lights a cigarette, and it's like, "This isn't her." And so they jibber jabber with that a little bit, and then Aurora figures out that it must be the Morlocks. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, Kurt's trying to do his like medical training on Colossus, and also Xavier's doing psi scans on Colossus, and Ileana is being comforted by Amanda, and they're not getting anything. And then Professor X gets another like psi attack, and then he starts launching like psi blasts, and so Nightcrawler comes over and kind of like gets him to stop, and he's like, "What's going on?" It's like, "There's some sort of alien thing from outer space is like attacking me and causing all these things." Meanwhile, back in the Morlocks tunnel, Kitty's having like some bizarre dream where she thinks she's getting married and everyone's dressed in tuxes and everything, but really it's just the Morlocks. And then she sees this guy who's very handsome, and she's excited to get married to like her prince. And then she like wakes up from like the mind control or whatever and sees that it's Caliban, freaks out, and like runs away. And then they grab her, and then she breaks free. And she can't use her powers right now, so she can't phase. But she gets in an argument with Callisto about, like, "Hey, you promised that if Caliban helped you, you would marry him." And then she's like, "I'm going to go help Colossus first, and then I'll come back." And then Callisto's like, "Whatever, you gave your word, you do what you want." And then so Kitty, like, runs around the sewers for a little bit and, like, falls. And then she gets found by Leech, who's a, like, little boy mutant who steals people's powers, and taken back. And then she's, like, kind of resigned to her fate. But then Mask, like, really fucks with her for a little bit. And Callisto's like, "Cut that fuck out, Mask. The fuck's wrong with you?" And then they start the wedding ceremony, and right when it's like, "Does anyone have an objection or hold your peace?" the X-Men show up. So Aurora's like, "I do." And then she blasts Callisto, and then Leech jumps on her, so she loses her powers, and then Callisto jumps on her. Meanwhile, Rogue and Wolverine are going, and then Kitty keeps telling them to stop. Because she's here voluntarily, right? Because she wants to do the right thing, and that's pretty pro quality. She did promise Caliban she would be with him forever. So she doesn't want to be like an asshole, and she wants to do what she says. So she eventually stops Logan from like killing some of these Murlocs and gets Aurora and Callisto to stop. and she gets there's a healer in the Morlocks, and she gets them to promise the healer can come up and heal Colossus, and then she'll come down. So they all go back to the X Mansion. So Callisto and the healer, and then the rest of the X-Men. And then Rogue absorbs Colossus's power, so he de-stones metal, and then he starts bleeding to death. And then the healer grabs him and like gives him all his life back, but then he's like still very weak because obviously he almost died. Later on, Kitty's still in her like fucking dirty wedding dress, getting ready to go back down to the Morlocks, and she's hugging it out with Ileana and giving her some letters for her parents and for Peter and saying goodbye to her friend and whatever. And then she walks downstairs, and Caliban is like very nice to her, talking about how beautiful she is and stuff, and he's like, thank you. And he's like, you look really sad. And he's like, yeah, this is not my world, but you know, I'll do what I best, and maybe someday we'll live happily ever after. And then Caliban, who has like true love for Kitty Pryde, is like, no, you're gonna be miserable, I don't want that. Everyone go home, we're not getting married. And then he tells her how much he loves her, and that because he loves her so much, he wants her to be happy and wants her to be free. So then he like forgives her of her debt, and says she can go. And then he gives her like the wedding gift he was gonna give her, which is like a single rose. No. It's so sweet. Oh my gosh, that was very good. Excellent all around. So go ahead, like, share, subscribe, comment, and I will catch you guys later. Bye.